Let the Holy Spirit guide. Pope Francis urges Synod bishops to have the courage and humility to be guided by God's surprises. Inundated. Parts of South Carolina in the path of a wave of water moving across the state to the coast. Grief and gratitude. Oregon mourners move forward in prayer after the shock of last week's campus shooting. And altar dedication. St. John Paul II's personal secretary visits his shrine in D.C. for a special blessing. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, October 5th, 2015. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Pope Francis opens the first working session of the Synod on the Family today. Bishops from all over the world meet for the next 3 weeks in the Vatican.
Non è un Parlamento o un Senato.
The Holy Father telling 270 cardinals, bishops, and priests that the 3-week Synod is not a parliament where negotiations take place. He says it is a sacred space where God shows the way for the good of the Church. He called the teachings of the faith a living source from which the Church drinks. Francis also laid out what the bishop's priorities should be.
Il bene della Chiesa, delle famiglie.
The good of the Church, he says, families, and the salvation of souls. The bishops are discussing how the Church can better care for families in the reality of today's society. At Sunday Mass, the Holy Father said the union between a man and a woman is the foundation of God's plan for the family.
L'uomo non divida quello che Dio ha congiunto.
He also warned the truth is not changed by passing fads or popular opinion. Mary Shovlain is covering the Synod on the Family for EWTN. Joining us from Rome tonight, Mary, what direction did the Synod take on this first working day?
It was a very interesting day, Brian. Good evening. The Synod Fathers met and we were able to witness everything that took place in the first 2 hours live. And the interesting thing this year was the presence of Pope Francis. Popes can either choose to attend this or not. His exhortation to his brother bishops was not to politicize this synod, so to speak, that this was not a parliament, but have the humility to take this journey, if we call it a journey of openness to the Holy Spirit, to see where the Holy Spirit is going to lead them as they try to be at service of the family.
The general theme, of course, is family, but what specific issues are they going to be beginning to discuss now?
The challenges which are facing the family today and the pastoral challenges they face in ministering to them. So we have families that have disabled children and are struggling with how to bring them up in the family, families who are have elderly that live with them, and the beauty of that, but also the challenges that can bring economically maybe on a family. Also, the very courage to stay together as a couple. They're talking about marriage preparation, what improvements could be made to that to make sure that when couples say I do, that they're ready and that they don't have to go into the annulment process, which is also something, of course, that the Synod Fathers will be discussing as they did last year.
Mary, very quickly, just describe what a synod is designed to do and how it works.
Well, synod comes from the Greek word to bring together, to travel together, and that's exactly what this is. It's bishops from all over the world. Began by Paul VI in 1965. He had this great idea to bring the bishops of the world together to discuss these problems that afflict the universal church. So they choose a theme and they come together as brother bishops how to address these problems universally and find solutions to bring home to their diocese and implement at the local level.
Mary Shovlain covering the Synod for us in Rome. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. California becomes the 5th state to allow terminally ill patients to legally end their lives using physician-prescribed drugs. Governor Jerry Brown, once a Jesuit seminarian, signs a bill approved by state lawmakers. Opponents say it legalizes suicide. The Catholic Church lobbied lawmakers to vote against it, urging the governor to veto the bill. At least 7 people are hurt as an Amtrak train en route to Washington, D.C. derails in central Vermont. We're told one person was seriously injured when a locomotive and a passenger car went over an embankment. Amtrak says the train may have hit a rock slide on the tracks. There have been 54 accidents on that stretch of track since 2006, including 14 derailments. More heavy rain today drenched and already flooded South Carolina. Rescuers are going door to door, checking on people stranded by the high water. Jason Calvi is here tonight with the story.
Brian, more than a foot of rain fell across South Carolina over the weekend. At least 12 people in the Carolinas have died, and thousands of residents don't have electricity or running water. Roads, now rivers in Columbia, South Carolina.
What I got on my body is what we have. Pretty much everybody down that hill there has lost everything this morning. Our vehicles, our clothes, our everything. We still have our lives. We still have our lives.
Emergency crews have rescued hundreds of people, including this mother and daughter. To keep people out of harm's way, 4 of the largest parishes in Columbia canceled some or all Sunday masses.
A deluge, and as many of our main arteries into and out of Columbia were flooded. And given the reality and concern that trees might topple, lines might be down, and other uncertainties, we simply viewed it as unsafe for our parishioners to travel to Mass. I think I would ask for prayers. Our state is devastated.
The National Weather Service says yesterday was the wettest day in Columbia's history, with nearly 7 inches of rain.
So me and my granddaughter went our way around and looked at the river, and that happened just that quick.
And more than 20 inches of rain fell in parts of Columbia this weekend.
We haven't seen this level of rain in the Lowcountry in 1,000 years.
The governor says 550 bridges and roads are closed, including nearly 70 miles of Interstate 95. 1,300 National Guardsmen are now on duty in South Carolina. The showers tapered off, but Governor Nikki Haley is warning communities downstream near the coast that they may still see rising water and should be prepared to evacuate. Brian?
Thank you, Jason. We send our prayers. And the U.S. airstrike that killed 22 at a medical clinic in Kunduz, Afghanistan over the weekend was requested by Afghan forces. That today from the top commander of U.S. and coalition forces in Afghanistan. General John Campbell says he's correcting an initial U.S. statement that the airstrike was launched to defend U.S. forces under fire. Campbell says Afghan forces advised U.S. Special Operations forces on the ground early Saturday morning that they needed U.S. air support. He says when the airstrike ensued, several civilians were, quote, accidentally struck. The military is investigating. A dozen medical staff members are reportedly among the dead. The U.S. and 11 other countries reach agreement on a big trade deal known as the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Final details of the deal were hammered out in Atlanta over the weekend. Supporters say the partnership will cut tariffs and import quotas, opening new Asia-Pacific markets to U.S. companies. Critics, many of them Democrats opposing the president, say it will result in the loss of U.S. jobs and business operations to other countries. Congress now has 90 days to review that deal. The Oregon campus where 9 people were killed last week reopens today in a limited capacity. This after a weekend of grief, but also gratitude. Catherine Szeltner has more tonight.
Brian, classes at Umpqua Community College won't resume for another week. Today, students and staff were allowed to retrieve belongings they left behind, fleeing for their lives October 1st. The Oregon community is now trying to move on with the help of prayer. In what's called the Bible Belt of Oregon, locals in rural Roseburg turn to God in grief.
Today, we're going to make a decision to move on.
On day 4 of classes, an Umpqua Community College student went on a 10-minute shooting rampage Thursday. He took 9 lives before his own. Survivors say the gunman singled out victims and asked if they were Christian.
Who would have thought that there would be a death in our country on American soil because we believe in Jesus Christ and we call ourselves Christians.
Pastors are the rock for the faithful in the dozens of churches in this town. On Sunday, hundreds gathered in prayer. Hands were lifted not in protest, but in praise. Archbishop Alexander Sample of Portland is comforting his flock. He said, why such shooting tragedies continue to happen is hard to understand. In Christ, sorrow, death, and loss are transformed by the glory of the resurrection. Many locals came to a Christian concert and prayer service to support the victims. Oregon residents are still shaken.
Our community has just been torn apart.
But not broken.
These people here are all coming together because that's the way we do things here. We love each other.
Thursday's shooting gives politicians new ammunition for their gun control agenda. Democratic presidential hopeful Hillary Clinton calls for expanded background checks in her plan unveiled today. Brian.
Catherine Szeltner, thank you. The Supreme Court opens a new term on this first Monday of October. The court considers cases involving public sector unions and affirmative action in higher education. It could also take up its first major abortion case since 2007, possibly revisiting the religious liberty clash over contraception coverage. Amy Howe is joining us. Amy is editor of SCOTUSBlog, a law blog that covers the Supreme Court. What cases are you most interested in?
Two cases. The first one is a case called Fisher versus University of Texas at Austin. It's a challenge to the university's consideration of race in its undergraduate admissions process. This case was at the Supreme Court a couple of years ago. The Supreme Court, after considering the case for many months, essentially punted. It sent the case back to the lower courts for it to take, it said, a tougher look. The lower court took that look. It said, looks fine to us. And so now it's back at the Supreme Court. The second case is a case called Friedrichs versus California Teachers Association. Almost 40 years ago, the Supreme Court held that public employees can be required, even if they can't be required to become members of the union that represents them, they can be required to pay what's known as the fair share of the costs that the unions incur in collective bargaining. And the Supreme Court, a few years ago in a case called Harris versus Quinn, suggested that it might be willing to revisit that case. And so that's the issue before the court this time around.
A couple of very interesting cases. I wonder, do you think the birth control mandate case will get on the docket?
I do. The first several lower courts of appeals that considered the birth control mandate had rejected the nonprofits' challenges to the birth control mandate. But then a couple of weeks ago, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit, which reviews appeals from generally the Midwest part of the country, agreed with the challengers and struck down the birth control mandate's accommodation for nonprofit religious groups. And so that creates the kind of conflict among lower courts that almost always prompts the Supreme Court to step in. The government has in fact agreed now with the challengers that the Supreme Court should step in. And there's an abortion law in Texas that's being challenged. Yes, there are two separate parts of this law that could be before the Supreme Court. One is what's known as the admitting privileges requirements. If you're a doctor that works at an abortion clinic, you have to have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals. The rationale is in case of emergencies. And the other one is a requirement that abortion clinics have facilities equivalent to a surgical center. And abortion rights groups say that this could close down most of the abortion clinics in the state, could make it very hard for women in rural areas, they say, to obtain abortion. So this could be the first time in many years that the Supreme Court has looked at what kinds of restrictions, short of actually prohibiting abortions, that states can put on abortions. Amy Howe with SCOTUSBlog. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Coming up, a Vatican official is fired after going public with his gay partner, accusing the church of homophobia. And many middle-class families spend more on student loan payments than for groceries, their home, or their car.
Chicken's nice.
Today, October the 5th, we celebrate St. Faustina Kowalska. In 1931, the simple Polish nun saw an image of Jesus. She was told to paint what she saw with the inscription, "Jesus, I trust in you," giving us the wonderful gift of the Divine Mercy devotion. Thanks for joining us this Monday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. On the eve of the Synod, a Vatican Monsignor outs himself as gay, denouncing what he calls widespread homophobia in the Church. Monsignor Krzysztof Charazaba worked in the Church's doctrine office. He announced this weekend he's in a homosexual relationship and called on the Synod to take up the plight of gays. The Vatican fired the Polish priest, calling his announcement very serious and irresponsible. A Vatican spokesman says it's up to his diocese to take further action. Alan Holdren joining us from Rome. Alan, Monsignor Charasma no longer works for the Vatican, but is he still a priest?
Yes, he is, Brian. He's still a priest. For the moment, his case is being sent back to his home diocese in Poland for further review by his bishop there.
What is the Vatican saying about his dismissal? Why was he fired from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith?
There was a very quick response from the Vatican press office, Brian. Father Federico Lombardi, the director there, explained that due to this pointed statement that he made in coming out so clamorously, he really was irresponsible. And this said Father Lombardi, is very grave, especially ahead of the Synod, in which he was trying to put, Father Lombardi said, this priest was trying to put undue media pressure on the Synod Assembly, in this case in favor of homosexual unions.
The Holy Father has clearly stated that the Synod will not be swayed by public opinion. Will this incident affect the work of the Synod at all?
You know, Brian, there was an archbishop who spoke to the local Italian press here today. He said that within the Synod, Monsignor Charasma's case really won't have any sort of reverberation. But he did mention that they are speaking about pastoral care for people with same-sex attractions as a number of other themes that affect the families today, this among many others, Brian.
On the first working day of the Synod, Alan Holdren in Rome. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Brian.
And as the Synod continues for the next several weeks, we explore a real issue facing many American families. Mark Irons reports on steep student debt.
The Biglers are struggling financially. They took out loans so John could attend school to become a physician's assistant, and so Lori could get her teaching credential. Then again to send their children to college.
Yeah, look at all those loans.
It adds up to more than 6 figures.
Per month we're paying probably, we're probably paying nearly $3,500 a month.
Yeah.
Most of that goes to educational debt. Moving to this tiny town in western Kansas is part of the payoff plan. Life is cheap here, and after John spends 10 years working in rural health, the federal government will forgive part of his loans. But it hasn't been easy. For 4 years, the family lived apart.
It was rough, so we had to borrow money. I mean, we just had to.
Yeah. Like the Biglers, many families are struggling to pay back their own loans while sending their children to college. In the last 10 years, the outstanding student debt has rocketed to $1.2 trillion, with 6 million Americans in their 40s owing more than $200 billion in educational loans. Experts say it's a multi-generational problem.
We're killing the American dream. We're punishing people for trying to better their lives.
The Biglers don't want student debt to dictate their kids' lives.
We didn't want them to say, well, I can't be a teacher if I want to be a teacher. I can't be this or I can't be that. That might do the world some good because I've got student loan debt.
John calculated the numbers and says he'll be 72 by the time he pays off all their loans. Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next, there's another hat in the ring for the powerful Speaker of the House position. And the chapel at D.C.'s St. John Paul II Shrine is now complete with its newly blessed altar. Today's Monday, October 5th, and this month of October is dedicated to the Holy Rosary. In praying the Rosary, each decade we meditate on a spiritual mystery, a scriptural mystery. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy now has some competition for the Speaker's position. Representative Jason Chaffetz of Utah announcing his candidacy on Sunday. He chairs the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. In fact, he launched one of the congressional investigations into Planned Parenthood. McCarthy remains the favorite tonight. However, that dynamic began to shift a little bit following his suggestion the Benghazi investigation is meant to drive down Hillary Clinton's poll numbers. A secret ballot to elect a new House Speaker is now set for Thursday. David Drucker is senior congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Can Chaffetz win the speakership?
I don't think so, but the whole Benghazi thing that McCarthy got himself wrapped up in probably created candidate Chaffetz. I don't think he would have run. They've been friends, and McCarthy's the overwhelming favorite because really, among the people that want the job, he's the only one that's done the work. He has the relationships, he's done the political work, and he's been in the trenches for a long time on the Hill. Other candidates that would have a chance at this that might just walk right into it, like a Paul Ryan, chairman of House Ways and Means, just doesn't want it. And so that's why McCarthy is the overwhelming favorite. Now, Chaffetz is causing him a little heat. He's sweating a little bit. I think at the end of the day, McCarthy still wins. But keep in mind, on Thursday, they're going to have a closed-door, secret ballot vote for House Speaker, and you need 218 votes, not just a majority of Republicans. But that's not binding. The binding vote is on the floor when everybody votes publicly. That's October 29th. So this thing is a little unstable and in flux.
Very interesting. So Chaffetz chaired a hearing on Planned Parenthood last week. Didn't look real strong there. What did you think? Did that hurt or help him?
Neither. Look, I think Chaffetz overall is reasonably well liked. He's done a good job at the committee. He actually leapfrogged over a couple of members to get the chairmanship of this committee, which people wanted, with the help of McCarthy and other leadership. But when it comes to all of the political and relationship work that you have to do to really ascend to the highest ranks of leadership in today's modern Congress, he just hasn't done it yet.
What do you think, who do you think, I should say, is the stronger of the two, Chaffetz or McCarthy, in terms of the leadership role?
I mean, I don't know if it's possible to answer that question, in that I don't know that Chaffetz would be a weaker speaker than Kevin McCarthy. But I just think if you want to look at preparation and who's probably the most equipped to create consensus among the members because of relationships and some demonstrated practice in bringing the different factions of House Republicans together, that would have to be McCarthy at this point. But I think that we can't underscore why his comments on the Benghazi committee so hurt him. What Republicans are hoping to get with the departure of Speaker Boehner is somebody who is a sort of a better communicator to the nation. And I think Boehner's communication skills have been a little underappreciated, but he was clearly never an orator.
And McCarthy didn't make any points.
Correct.
Comment. All right, David Drucker with the Washington Examiner. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. The St. John Paul II National Shrine in Washington gets the blessing of JP2's personal friend and confidant. Polish Cardinal Stanislaus Dziwisz helped dedicate a newly renovated church and altar over the weekend. Wyatt Goolsby was there for that celebration.
In the Catholic Church, the dedication of an altar is known as a celebration, but visitors to the JP2 shrine had another reason to celebrate. Krakow's Archbishop, Cardinal Stanislaus Dziwisz, offered his personal blessing to the newly renovated Redeemer of Man Church. Dziwisz was JP2's right-hand man. He served as his secretary in Poland and then alongside him during his pontificate. He was there when he was shot in 1981.
I was so pleased to welcome him here because he's the living link. He's the living contact with St. John Paul.
This altar contains a relic of JP2 and other saints connected to North America.
It goes back to the whole vision of the shrine to be a place for the new evangelization for the North American continent, for Canada, the United States, and Mexico, and ideally located in Washington, D.C., because so many people travel to Washington, D.C.
Col vestito che si attacca e viene da Cristo.
Italian sculptor Edoardo Ferrari made the altar. He carved all 12 of the apostles. Ferrari tells me creating a piece of art that will be seen by hundreds of thousands of pilgrims is a great responsibility.
Qui c'è una parte del mio cuore.
Ferrari says he leaves a part of his heart and his life in that altar and a message for future generations. That message is to keep Christ at the center of the church and at the center of every heart. At the John Paul II Shrine in Washington, Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Wyatt. And until tomorrow, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. We leave you tonight with pictures from the opening days of the 3-week Synod on the Family in Rome. Good night, and may God bless you.